Redditors who clean up crime scenes. What's the most bizarre thing you've witnessed? A family friend removes the deceased from their homes, etc. since they own their own funeral home. They said that the weirdest thing they saw was a woman lying face up in a tub and a man laying on top of her. When she took them apart, she knew why they were like that. Guy had domestic abuse problems and they were going through a separation. Kids in the other room, mom in the bathroom doing her hair. The guy comes in and just stabs her several times, puts her in the tub and places the knife in her hands while he jumps on top of her and stabs himself either in the chest or abdomen and bleeds out. She said she'll never forget how sad and unusual it was, especially for those kids who thankfully were asleep. I think her mom found them. I hate thinking about it and I hope that family can heal. Was expecting them to be found like that due to the bang bang, not the stab stab. I clean up suicides, decomps, where the person has been dead for days or weeks before being found, and crime scenes. You find the obvious stuff like adult toys, drug paraphernalia. One time I found a maybe fictional, maybe autobiographical journal of how this guy lost his testicles in an angle grinder accident. This same guy had a small metal pipe, like a herb one-hitter, along with some kind of dried fruit, like cherries or small plums, hidden in a box in his closet. It was like he was smoking it. IDK. We are pretty versed in the world of drugs and we couldn't figure that crap out. As many first responders have already pointed out, the amount of brain and skull fragments left behind is a lot bigger than what I would have imagined. Crap, they'll leave eyeballs behind. I've seen over half of an intact brain, a skull fragment big enough to use as a bowl, teeth. They get the biggest part of the body and roll out. They're not gonna spend an hour looking for all the giblets. That's why they pay us the big bucks. What's strange to me is that a lot of adults go to their parents' house to kill themselves. Kinda fricked up. Suicide season is not during the holidays. We are way more busy during spring than the end of the year. The most eerie thing is how often we do suicides in rooms that just look normal. It's hard to explain, but it's just strange to go into a normal looking bedroom with a half-drank Gatorade on the dresser, a half-read book on the nightstand, and a big Olay blood stain on the floor. Also seeing the different ways the families cope with the tragedy. Our service is expensive yo, and there's been times I thought I was gonna get hit when I told them our estimated price. Especially if it's grandma or grandpa that swallowed a bullet and half the freaking family tree is at the house. I've done suicides as young as 12 and as old as 80s. You get the people that are just on autopilot that ask weird questions cause they really aren't on the same plane of existence. We tear out all the carpet in a room if a gun is used. CSF is clear and is also a BBP carrier, so if it looks clean, it might still be contaminated. We've had the carpet pulled and removed and I've had family members ask, while they're looking at the slab concrete, if we are just gonna shampoo the carpet. You get the people that seem almost happy that the person is gone. I've heard people say well now that their kid is gone, we can finally take that cruise. IDK if it's just a coping mechanism or if they're just massive buttholes. I try not to judge, keyword, try. After working in hospice I can say this grief makes people do strange things. Very strange things. I used to do CSI work and was an autopsy tech, so I would both go to the scene, investigate, bring the body back to the morgue, and help with the autopsy. Anyways, this person murdered their spouse, and stuffed the body into a fridge, and buried it in the woods. When you have a body exposed to the elements, you have normal decomposition to look forward to, such as insects, bloating gases, skin coming off, bones showing, etc. Once you've seen a few, then you know that this kind of decomp state of body is normal and you know what to expect. There are varying levels of stuff you deal with, but it's all within an expected spectrum of the job. Hope that makes sense. However, in this case, this person was sealed in, so you didn't have any of that. They were essentially stewing in there for almost a year. Might have been longer. I don't remember the exact time. I wasn't there on scene when they found the person. Only in the morgue, to help with the autopsy. So I prep the room. Doctor comes in, and I pull out the body from the fridge and wheel them into where we do the actual autopsy. Opened the bag, and oh my god, the smell. I'll never, ever forget the smell. I've dealt with bodies in various stages of death and decomposition, but holy crap, this was on 10 other levels. Now the morgue has HVAC, air filters, fresheners, and all that, but they weren't effective at all for the smell. It was so bad I gagged, which I've never done before, and almost threw up in my mask. The doctor was struggling too. The doc double-backed and almost looked like they were gonna faint. It was the purest, worst, most concentrated, extremely pungent ammonia smell you could think of. I had never smelled anything like that in my career at that point. If wine ages well and is better with time, this ammonia smell did the exact opposite, and it was somewhere worse than anything you could think of. The smell stuck to us too, on our skin. For about a week, no matter how hard I scrubbed, I can still smell it if I think about it. The texture of the body didn't help either. It was so slippery and wet that flecks of the ammonia fluid splashed onto my skin. The long gloves went up to my forearm, not all the way to my scrubs. It was the worst autopsy of my life. It took about 3 hours because we kept having to take breaks and it was a difficult body to work on due to how fragile it was. It beat out everything else I saw. From the crazy accident fatalities, the interesting suicides, to even the person who had half their face eaten by rats and half their body covered in a sea of maggots and insects. I don't clean them for a living but had to clean a few apartments when my uncle managed an apartment complex. We had one tenant OD on H. He sat there for roughly 3 weeks before anyone noticed the smell. They took his body and left it to us to clean up. The dude vomited on the ceiling. There were little dry droplets of vomit all over the ceiling right above where he died, and to top it off he basically liquefied and left a puddle of gut juices on the concrete foundation underneath the carpet. I thought that crap was left to a professional team, but I guess it's optional, and if you don't want to pay for it, you can scoop the brains and blood up yourself. I wonder if state laws vary wildly in that situation, because we had to clean my home after a family member committed suicide, but we still had to pay a crime scene cleanup company to remove the bags of trash and carpet. $5,000 for just disposal, $10 K plus if they had to come in and clean it themselves. User T-Mop, propane nat gas explosion. Guy's arm was holding onto a ladder going up a holding tank. No body, no anything, just an arm. It was his left arm. I have a story about someone who launched their entrails over a bathroom that's probably 81 square feet. I clean up biohazard material, dead bodies for my company on occasion because I'm one of the only 2 that's certified. My co-worker went into a house to clean a body, but the boss failed to mention they had been dead for 2 weeks. Okay, whatever, I can deal with that. We walked to the house and not only could you smell it from the start of the driveway, but all the windows were black. Okay, this dude had blackout curtains, I understand that. We suited up and went into the house, which was relatively clean given the circumstances. We knew he died in the bathroom, so we made our way upstairs and followed the flies. So, you know how flies swarm decaying things? Yeah, it wasn't blackout curtains in the bathroom. The windows were caked in so many flies that sunlight couldn't come in. My boss also failed to mention he died in the bathtub. You hear about bloating and blah blah blah, but do you know what happens when a body sits in a bathtub for 2 weeks and soaks up all that water? It explodes. The entrails and remains of this soup was all over the taking. The walls, the door, it was everywhere. There was no water in the bathtub, just this sickly pink colored stew. That was the most disgusting cleanup I've done by far. I can't even imagine what it sounded like when that happened. My dad used to clean up crime and trauma scenes about 10 years ago and said he had to clean up a suicide one time where he found bits of brain on top of a ceiling fan. He thought that was the worst of it until they moved a TV stand and found a nose behind it. One of our worst was an old dude brought her H to his trailer. She robbed him, stabbed him, and put him on top of the electric stove with the burners on. My best friend used to have this job. Most of the bizarre stuff was cleaning up suicides. Found a guy's full intact mustache across the room when he blew his head off with a shotgun. One guy tried to kill himself by shooting his stomach with a small caliber pistol. He didn't die immediately, so he wrote tons of whacked out stuff on the walls with his blood, then finished the job. Crime scene cleaner here. My first suicide cleanup was quite an experience. Man shot himself in the head in his garage. I'll never forget needing to use pliers to pull teeth and skull fragments out of the drywall behind where he sat, or that blood and brain managed to make its way more than 50 feet across the garage. Most disturbing though, was his pickup. We chose to take it to our company wash bay to pressure wash it and make sure it was as clean as possible. I cleaned it myself and was satisfied that I had done well. Inspected for blood and couldn't find anything, so I began driving it back to the owner's garage. On the way back a slight drizzle began and switched on the wiper blades. Imagine my horror as a chunk of brain streaks across my newly cleaned windshield. I pulled over quickly and cleaned it up, but it still makes me sick to think what would have happened if it didn't rain that day. This man's poor wife or daughter would have been met with that sight and been crushed again by the impact of suicide. That 10 years ago and I'll never forget it. Now I triple or quadruple check every job. Okay, not a crime scene cleaner but I'm a medic. Have a few bizarre ones. Came into a home to find a man who had attempted to commit suicide by putting a pistol under his jaw but failed. Had a second thought. He ended up having to crawl 5 feet away to where he had thrown the pistol after only blowing the left side of his face off to finish the job. The second one did the trick. Just about every surface in his living room had some remnant of the poor guy. He left behind 2 kids. Another time we had a husband who had caught his wife cheating and had turned on the garbage disposal and forced her arm down it. Massive hemorrhaging. But unfortunately she was DOA. Husband ended up with a self-inflicted shotgun wound. People really don't understand just how messy a shotgun can make things. Think the Hulk smashing a blood and brain-filled Pinata. And this one was more weird than anything, but here goes. Older gentleman we were called to after police performed a wellness check, late 70s. Nice house. Nice foreign car in the driveway. Pictures of prayers and crosses all over the house. We head into the bedroom and there he is, naked except for what I assume was one of those hot nun Halloween costumes. Honestly I don't know, but he ended up having a heart attack mid-pleasure time while choking himself with a rosary. Definitely one of the weirdest things I ever saw during my time working the box. Garbage disposal story is brutal. Jesus Christ. Just trying to do my part to get actual crime cleaners here, but I'm a medic, so similar I guess. One time we found this guy dead in his home in the corner of the living room, tucked around the couch, butt up, no cloths on. Literal coffee ground looking crap spread everywhere across the house, on the floors, furniture, walls, everywhere, along with mass amounts of liquor bottles and glass everywhere. He had massive GI issues along with drinking himself to death. Don't know what was worse, the smell or the scene. Was dispatched to a vehicle versus pedestrian call a couple months ago, and when we arrived on scene it was like something out of a movie. Dude was running across a fairly busy 4-lane road and was hit by a car traveling about 55 miles per hour. After his head went through the windshield of the first vehicle, he then proceeded to be thrown into the opposite lane and was ran over and dragged about 20 yards by another vehicle. Once the coroner was on scene with traffic investigations, we proceeded to pick up his organs bit by bit. It was a fantastic anatomy lesson. And that is why you should not jaywalk, in a nutshell. I'm a fire investigator. My worst one was a lady who committed suicide by immolation in her basement. When I got to the scene, the body had already been removed, but there was a clear pattern on the floor where she had died. An empty can of gasoline was nearby. Her glasses were gently placed on top of the water heater. On a table were several ritualistic books. Some passages were highlighted, involving ridding yourself of the darkness by performing the flame ritual and other culty stuff. So, to perform the act, she removed her glasses and placed them on the water heater. She doused herself in gasoline and lit herself on fire. You could see that she ran around the room, bumping into things and knocking things over before finally falling down at the center of the room, meeting her fate. Mental illness is some serious crap. I used to work in forensics, picking up decedents as well as assisting the medical examiner in conduction of the autopsy. Not necessarily cleaning up the scene, but I've seen a guy who, during some kind of psychotic break, completely castrated his entire package. He then proceeded to stuff the entire package into his mouth and down his throat. He then slit his own throat. Did all of this with a cheap kitchen knife in his shower. Cause: exsanguination complicating transverse carotid and jugular severance. Manner: suicide. Just want to address anyone who is asking about it potentially being a homicide and give a little bit more background info. I was reluctant at first to give out too much detail, but here is what I'll offer. There was a call to a Section 8 development about a man down the hall acting extremely erratically. He had no known history of drug abuse and no diagnosed psychiatric illnesses. His mother, whom he lived with, as well as many of the neighbors, called 911 multiple times and first responders were allegedly taking their sweet time getting to the scene. He lured his mother out into the hallway and then ran back into the apartment alone and locked the door behind him. He then ran to the kitchen, grabbed the knife, went and turned the shower on, and did the deed. He was picked up by EMS and brought to a local hospital where he was pronounced DOA due to his injuries. No preliminary toxicology was conducted by the hospital. His remains were then picked up by us for examination. Unfortunately for the conclusion of the story, this happened on one of my last days of work after I already put in my 2 weeks notice. Thus, I don't have access to the post-mortem toxicology report to find out why he did it. If the tox is negative for illicit substances, we may, and will likely never know why he actually did it. My personal hypothesis was that he suffered from some form of developmental disorder, and combined with a latent psychiatric illness of some sort, compounded with an unresolved body gender dysmorphia complex, was unable to cope with his feelings and broke. Cause: exsanguination complicating transverse carotid and jugular severance. Thanks. I always wanted to know the technical term for doing that. I occasionally work on the weekends for a funeral home. It's decent money for what is essentially 2 hours of call-out work when their normal staff is off. Last year I was called in at around 5 in the morning. A 30-something-year-old guy had killed himself, shot himself, in a pretty small 2-bedroom apartment. That wasn't the bizarre part at all since I've seen it before on call-outs. What was bizarre was what was in the apartment. Literally thousands of documents, piled on the floor, on a desk, on shelves, of people's financial information, credit card statements, bank statements, personal data, etc. Probably 3,000 folders with all this stuff in it. Even where there weren't piles of folders, there were just loose papers, magnetic cards, surveillance cameras. It was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And of course, some of these documents and folders had blood and brains spattered all over them. Didn't matter to me though, since the detective on scene had said it was fine to take the body. The police had to clear a path by collecting the papers from the route we would take from the door to the apartment to where he was. A couple of months later, it came out that the guy had over $1 million in cash and Bitcoin. Apparently the state police were onto him. Family member did heavy duty cleaning including crime scenes. A guy shot his head off with a shotgun. EMTs were supposed to pick him up, literally, but missed a large chunk of brain behind a couch. That was when said family member decided to find other engagement. I don't do any sort of thing, but if anyone is interested in hearing some in-depth stories from someone who does, there is a podcast called The Cleaning of John Doe. It goes pretty in-depth and it's very informative, but definitely not for the faint of heart. I was so sad when she stopped making episodes. It is super informative and I appreciated the standards that she set within her industry. She always emphasized the importance of being respectful to the deceased and their family. Don't know if this counts as a crime scene, but at my work we had to pick teeth out of a rock garden after a guy blew his head off with a shotgun. Not even close to crime scene cleanup. Unless you consider the poor freaking tow driver that has to tow suicide and homicide cars trucks. Had a pickup with one rider from police impound. I get there and a wicked paint job on this car. Weird patterns over white paint. Interior was a purplish color. Not putting 2+2 I got in. Noticed the glove box open with a handprint on it. 3 seconds later it hit me. All this crap is blood. The flecks were what was left of his brain. The cool paint job was powder for prints. Needless to say, cussed out my boss to the I should have been fired area. Burned my clothes and showered for hours. Mind you, this was put through an auto club. Some butthole out here took that call and didn't even add hazmat label to it. Frick you, whoever you are. My cousin was a tow truck driver at the scene of an accident. The police couldn't find the driver's decapitated head in the long grass, so soon everyone was tasked with finding it. He found it down the slopes towards a small river if I recall, and carried it back to them by the hair. I interned at a small town morgue and mostly did boring paperwork and cleanup throughout the day, until one fateful Tuesday both my bosses decided they'd let me tag along to help transport the deceased. Bizarre is an understatement as to what we saw when we pulled up. It looked like white smoke was coming out of the front door of the home. but the fire department was nowhere to be seen and there was no sign of a fire. All of the people that would step out of the house had white stuff all over them. The entire inside of the home was covered in flour. It was thrown against the walls, poured all over the floor, tables, chairs, TV. There were even patches of flour on the ceiling where someone took fistfuls and tried covering the dang light fixtures. I didn't go through the entire house, but every room I looked in as we went to the bathroom where the deceased was found was also covered in flour. Whatever you're imagining, multiply that by 10. I couldn't tell you the color of a single thing in that house. We eventually were handed masks cause it was becoming difficult to breathe. Anytime we turn around or take a step it'd send clouds of flour into the air. Empty flour bags thrown everywhere. In case anyone is curious, the deceased was a middle-aged woman. I overheard an officer tell my boss to wait before collecting the body. I think they were calling in a different investigator. They originally assumed the death was natural because she had heart problems. Not sure how they knew this, but the condition of the home suggested someone was attempting to cover up a crime. That amount of flour plus a match will result in a massive fire explosion. Seems like a cover-up cut short. My friend wasn't an official crime scene cleaner, but he drove a tow truck and they often had to deal with some gruesome aftermath. The worst one was a man we had both met before, recently married, baby on the way, seemed happy enough. They found his car parked down in a secluded spot by the lake off a major highway at one of his favorite fishing spots. He had shot himself in the head and was found days later when the car was reported as suspicious to the police. I happened to be riding with my friend that day, chilling and helping him unlock cars and bring people gas and whatnot. We got a police call, usually just towing a car from an accident or because the driver is drunk. Because of the suicide's location and the proximity to heavy traffic, they had us tow the vehicle to our lot, which was nearby, in order to wait for the coroner and better get him out. So that we found ourselves towing a vehicle with the dead body of someone we knew in the driver's seat. It was surreal. The worst part was the next day when his pregnant wife wanted to get items out of the car. She asked for his favorite hat. He had been wearing it when he shot himself and it had blood all over it and a bullet hole through the top. The shop said they didn't see it and she couldn't go to the car yet. They told her they would call her if they find it and spent the rest of the day trying to decide what to do. Since the hat looked new, she said he had just gotten it earlier that month for his birthday. They located a brand new one at the local mall and a few shop techs wore it around for a couple days to try to make it look used. They then gave her that hat instead and said they found it in the glove box or something. It just didn't seem right to give her a bloody token of her husband's recent suicide. She was so happy they had found it. Truly heartbreaking. My friend was a bit messed up for a while after that. It really made him more angry than anything. He kept going on about how selfish suicide is. I never told him I had considered it as a teenager. If I had had access to a gun, that might have been me in that car. You just never know what people are dealing with. I hope the wife is doing fine now. If his wife is reading this, I hope you understand that switching the hat came from a place of love and concern. Though they barely knew you, they didn't want to put you through more trauma, but still wanted you to have the closure you deserved. I hope you see the hat as a token of how much strangers cared for you and wanted the best for you. I also wish with all my heart that you are doing well. For anyone going through heck right now and feel alone, I care. I know it's hard and exhausting, but I believe in you. Please reach out to the people you care about. If you don't feel like you can do that, please message me. I am happy to listen and do what I can to help. You're an incredibly strong person and you deserve a life of happiness and love. Good on the shop techs for going above and beyond with the hat thing. That's pretty heartwarming despite the fricked up story. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.